the scriptures today highlight the law, the commandments, God's will for our lives. And we know that if we step out of that law, if we disobey the Lord's commandments, we need to be reconciled with the Lord. It amazes me how many times I've talked with people about confession and how many times people have said to me, oh, I don't go to confession. I haven't killed anybody. Okay. Are you implying that everyone who stands in line did kill somebody? But it's interesting. There sometimes is that attitude of like, well, that's the sin. That's like the worst thing that anyone could possibly do. And yes, it is. But as if it's the only thing ever worth confessing. I think, honestly, if we were to look at the Ten Commandments and just looking at them on the surface level, I don't know, they may not be so bad. You might, I don't know, I didn't cheat on my spouse this week. I haven't killed anybody this month. I haven't lied in court. I haven't stolen anybody's car. Like, I'm doing pretty good. I think just looking on the surface, you might be like, wow, I mean, that's 4 out of 10 that I don't have. Like, that's not bad. And the Pharisees and the scribes that Jesus is always dialoguing with, it seems, these guys were experts at that kind of legalism. They could say, oh, no, I haven't broken that particular commandment. But they came up with all sorts of ways to justify their sinfulness. They might say, well, because of this and this, that doesn't exactly count as breaking this particular commandment. They were really good at that. But the Lord says that he's come not to abolish the law or the prophets, but to fulfill them. The Lord has come to fulfill the law being the Ten Commandments primarily. So he's not washing those things away. He makes these even more difficult in a way. The Ten Commandments are more challenging from a Christian perspective than they would have been before Jesus. I think sometimes, and maybe this is just a byproduct of the last several decades, we've had a bad habit sometimes of watering down Jesus, making it seem like Jesus just wants you to be nice. Like if you're just generally a nice person, you're fine. You're totally going to heaven. It'll be fine. But that's not how Jesus seems to talk about it. I mean, you read, this is Matthew chapter 5. Jesus gets into some of the weeds, it feels like maybe from our perspective. Like, man, he's really hitting some of these sins, and he's elevating things that we might have not have seen as terribly big. He's elevating them to a much higher level. He's calling us to a very high level of holiness. And yet it's not a different law. He's coming to fulfill the law. So I guess the image I have had in my head the last day or so as I've been preparing this homily is the image of a walnut and a walnut tree. They are the same thing, ultimately. The one is the walnut brought to its fulfillment. And the one is still the same thing, but it doesn't have the same life. In a similar way, maybe we can look at the Ten Commandments and Jesus' teachings. The Ten Commandments is still the Lord's word. It is still God's will for us. In no way is he abolishing the Ten Commandments. The Lord still expects us to live those out. But he's going to take us deeper. He's going to actually now that we're grown-ups, we're allowed to hear the rest of this. And so he elevates some of these things to murder, to adultery, to lying that we maybe not have thought of as those things before. For example, he talks about adultery. You've heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery, but I say to you, everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Okay, like Jesus is getting to the core of that sin. It's not just about don't cheat on your spouse or have a relationship with someone who's married, which a legalist might look at that and say, oh yeah, that's all that it is. I haven't committed adultery. Jesus is saying, no, the adultery begins in our hearts. It's an issue of lust. The Catechism says that lust is having a disordered, disordered desire for and enjoyment of sexual pleasure. If I have a disordered attachment to that thing, lust and love do not go together. They are opposites. The one is self-giving, the other one is taking. So the Lord is challenging us to look at the lust that's in our hearts. Anyone who looks at a woman with lust, that means that double take of that person walking down the street that you thought was pretty good looking the first time. That means pornography. That means the things we might do in our imagination. All of that. Suddenly, the Lord is raising it to the level of adultery. And we need to be confessing that because that's a serious thing. Murder. This is the one that's hardest for me. You shall not kill. Whoever kills will be liable to judgment. But I say to you, whoever is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Anyone who says you fool will be liable to fiery Gehenna. You catch that? You call anybody a fool, you could go to hell. I've come up with some much more interesting words while driving. And I need the Lord's mercy for that. When we hold anger against somebody else, we're committing murder in our heart. It's contrary to love. The Lord is elevating so many things to the commandments and saying, no, this is really what it means. This is deeper, it's harder. And we might hear that and say, well then, who's gonna try? Like, I can't do this on my own. And you can't. You absolutely cannot do it on your own. Christianity's not, though, ultimately just about being good. It's not just about this moral code that we're called to. We're called to a high moral code, obviously. Christianity is ultimately about letting our heart be transformed, that we might be more like Jesus. In fact, that we might be more Jesus. Letting the Lord transform our hearts so that he's loving through us. If that's what we're focused on, if we're willing to focus on letting Jesus transform my heart, not just tweak this or that, help me to be a little less gossipy and a little less this. If I'm willing to let the Lord just change my heart, make me more like him, then all of these things are going to come with that. I'm not going to be angry. I'm not going to struggle with lust. Well, I'm going to be tempted with it, but I'm not going to be giving into it. I'm not going to be swearing false oaths and that sort of thing. If I'm really allowing the Lord to live within me and transform my life, then I'm fulfilling the commandments. So it doesn't have to be about a legalism of what did I do wrong, what did I do right. Yes, those things still matter, but our heart is in letting the Lord transform us. That's the most important thing for us. So today as we come to this Eucharist, we're asking the Lord for the grace to live the commandments the way that he's called us to. But maybe more importantly, we're asking the Lord to transform our hearts so that he might live through us.